unpacking today's headlines. This is Souls and Liberty in Depth.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to In Depth, the production of Souls and Liberty. 68 days to go until the election, with the post-Labor Day full sprint almost here. So joining us today to talk about what we should be looking for, as well as how things look right now, is our handy-dandy, always at our disposal, awesome, terrific political consultant, Jim Ellis, frequent guest here on In Depth. And Jim, we'll go right to you. What's the most striking thing to you to date when it comes to the actual outcome of the election? Of all the stuff you're looking at here just before Labor Day weekend kicks in, what do you see? What would you point people to look at?
Well, good morning, first of all. Right now, it is pretty much a smorgasbord. So, Gary, you tell me what you want to see, or anybody listening and watching. What do you want to see? Do you want to see Harris up in a state, Trump up in a state? I can find a poll that shows you that. They're all over the board right now. The one thing that's consistent is it's all extremely close. And that's sort of a symptom of how close the election is. But it goes beyond polling. I mean, we're going to see polls from now until Election Day. But there are other underlying things that need to be considered as well. And we've covered this once before regarding the positive registration, voter registration figures. There's 30 states where when you register to vote, you register by political party. And in the other 20, you don't. But in those states and the battleground states that have voter registration, or partisan voter registration, if you will, the Republican gap between the registered Republicans and registered Democrats has closed in the Republicans' favor in every one of them. And as I mentioned before, and I think this is worth stating again, in Arizona, Nevada, and New Hampshire, now the number if you take the 2020 election and the number of votes that Trump lost those states by, the actual Republican number is higher than that deficit.
Okay.
So that's the change. And I think that's a big deal. And so your universe is larger now in all of these states. Pennsylvania is another good example. Yeah. It wasn't long ago, before 2020, where the Democrats had a 1 million person advantage. I was going to say it was like a
million, plus Democrats in the registration thing. That's not the case now, is it?
It's down to 346,000. Now, the Democrats still have more, but that's a huge difference.
Now, let me ask you, just from the viewer's perspective, to put that into perspective, is that because Democrats have just, what's going on underneath those numbers? Is that the Democrats have they pulled an RFK and said, can't support this anymore, it's not my father's Democratic Party, I'm going to go join the Republicans? Or have many of them just died, or not there, they're dropped off the rolls for whatever reason, and there hasn't really been an increase in Republicans, just the margin has increased towards Republicans? What's the reality under the numbers?
A combination.
Okay.
And it's a combination of all you said. And some of the states do have purges still. For example, Ohio. Mm-hmm. They were able to purge, in other words, remove from the rolls 155,000 people that were on the voter rolls and would have been getting ballots. But they are not on the rolls anymore for a various number of reasons. One, they've been able to prove the person is deceased. The person no longer lives at that particular address. Or in some states, they have laws that say if you haven't voted in a number of consecutive elections, whatever their number may be, then you automatically come off the rolls. So that's happened, and that explains some of the decrease, particularly among the Democrats. Mm-hmm. In almost all these states, Democrats are down and Republicans are up. But it's not all just because people are running from the Democratic Party to the Republican Party. It's a lot of just because of the purge, and those people are no longer in the state, no longer living, or have been disqualified for what other reason. So that is, I think, a real positive step for the Republicans. The other thing you have to look at is the voter polling history. Mm-hmm. I'll give you a good example. This week, there are some polls. There's one poll out, and there was one out last week that showed Senator Rick Scott in Florida only ahead by 3 or 4 points.
Right.
And this is a great example. So I went back and looked at the 2022 election, for example, because it's always been my thought, and this is being proved now, that the Republicans tend to underpoll in the southern states. So in other words, their vote performance is better than what the polls suggest. Mm-hmm. And that's almost across the board in the South. In New Jersey, for example, the Republicans overpoll. They usually poll better than they actually do. So it just depends on the state and how things are going. But Florida, there's a huge underpoll. So you say Senator Scott is only 3 to 4 points up in these head-to-head polls right now. Well, okay. If you look back in August, let's take Marco Rubio, Senator Rubio in 2022. He was up only by 2 in August. He won by 17.
It's quite the underpoll.
I was amused to see they had, when I went to Real Clear Politics and looked back at their archive, now they're great because they keep all these polls and you can go back and research all.
Yeah, you can go back years,
still on their online.
Cycles, many cycles. It's great. It's good research.
It's really helpful. But I was amused to find that in the governor's races of 2022, they only had DeSantis listed as lean Republican, just lean Republican when it started based on polling. He won by 20 points.
Yeah.
So that's, and if you look at all these polls, you look at Rubio, you look at DeSantis, there was a congressional race now, they show the Republican behind the Republican incumbent. In each of those cases, if you go back to just the 2022 election, they underpolled by 7 points, all of them. So if we take that and extrapolate that over Rick Scott down 3 to 4, he's really up 10 to 11. Mm-hmm. And I think that will prove to be the case. And the other thing we talk about registration, Florida is the greatest example of all. Sure. If you look back at 2018, now Rick Scott, when he was first elected to the Senate, he won by only 10,000 votes out of over 8 million cast. So it was extremely close election. In 2018, there were 257,000 more Democrats than Republicans.
Right.
Today, there's 956,000 more Republicans than Democrats in Florida.
Yeah, it's a swing of 1.2 million. Period, that's insane.
1.2 million in a 6-year period.
That's crazy.
And most of that's after 2020.
Sure.
So it's really kind of astonishing what's happened in Florida. And I think some of the other southern states are that way too. And so watch for the underpoll when you look at these polls. And we see that in North Carolina. Trump has been ahead in North Carolina almost all year against Biden, and now he might be a point down against Harris. This is typical North Carolina polling. Mm-hmm. And you could probably add 2 points to Trump's number in North Carolina. That's been the history there. Remember, he was down in polls in 2016 and in 2020 in that state, and he won it both times.
Sure.
So we look at Pennsylvania, and I think there's some of that in Pennsylvania too, 1 or 2 points of an underpoll for Trump. As I was looking at the Trump analysis from their pollster, they were saying, look, in 2016 and in 2020, Trump was hardly ever ahead in a poll in Pennsylvania.
That's correct. Yeah.
In this year, he's been ahead about 70% of the time.
Right.
And I think could be reflective of the change in registration, because remember, the Pennsylvania votes have been very, very tight.
Sure. Yeah, and when you got a million registered voters more, a million more registered voters sitting in your corners, the Democrats had, that's, if it's even going to be close with that, well, when you carve 750,000 of them off, or 700,000 of them off, makes it even, at that point. Plus, there's also the question that, Trump's going to be going back to Butler. That's,
yes, he is.
Again, the major media will just ignore that. But the major media I certainly wouldn't say they're getting lapped by conservatives and patriots on social media, on all of those platforms. They don't have the same single megaphone, and that's the difference. They don't have the same, giant megaphone that the major media have, but they've got a bunch of little ones, and it's kind of like a million ants attacking an elephant. Eventually, the elephant is going to lose. But, it doesn't go down without a struggle. I think when Trump goes back to Pennsylvania, anybody who's following this at all relatively closely, first of all, how big is that crowd going to be? That's got to be, that may be his biggest crowd ever. And I don't know.
I would think it very well may be.
Is he going back to the same place, the exact same spot? He should.
I'm not sure about that. But he is going back to Butler. And
I'd
it's
suggest
also
putting
going to
somebody on the
honor
roof.
people.
I'd put somebody up on that roof.
Yeah, I would too. One of my people.
Yeah, one of my people. Wouldn't need the Secret Service.
No, they had it, and I think a lot of that event is going to be in memory
Yes,
of
it will
the people of the person that passed away, and also those that were injured by these gunshots. That Christopher Wray, the head of the FBI, was saying, well, maybe it was just shrapnel. A person died. It wasn't certainly because of shrapnel, and these other people that were seriously injured certainly were shot by bullets, like Trump was.
Yeah, their hatred for the truth.
That'll be quite an event.
I mean, that is you wanted to get into it on this show. We're going to be talking about it later, but the Democrats, communist Democrats, hatred for the truth. I mean, they see the truth and they don't care what it is. And somebody come up to them and say, here, you won $1 billion on the lotto. You did, Mr. Senator, or whatever. Like, no, that's not true. They hate the truth so much that even when it's good for them, they like repel against it. It's kind of frightening to watch. I mean, it's a real spiritual spotlight there. But let me go back to the election process, because you're so good at all of this and you know all this stuff so well. And, if you're an audience member sitting at home just watching this or watching on your phone or wherever, just listening to it, maybe in the car, if you like this kind of analysis and what we're talking about and everything here, please just click on that button and give us a donate. Nobody gives us nobody does what we do in this kind of tying together of the spiritual stuff with the political stuff, with the cultural stuff, all part of the thing. And it's not enough to just say, well, just pray to Jesus. Well, no, it's you need to understand what your motive is and what's going on and the big picture and all of that. So anybody, you're listening to this, you like how we present things to you here, the fantastic guests we have on, like Jim Ellis, for example, and all the rest of our contributors, please just click on that donate button and, give us a little props and stuff. Costs a lot of money, as you know, to run anything like this. So here we are. But back to this, Jim, I want to do a little, there's various, I know there's like some debate. Was there a steal or rigged and all that in 2020 and everything? But whether or not that actually caused things to happen, I know different people have different opinions about it, but there are links in this chain that every part of them, every single link needs paying attention to. Right now, as RFK said, they're trying to keep him off the ballots, beforehand. Now he wants to get off the ballots in certain states like Michigan, for example, because he's afraid he might split the vote and, that would help Kamala. So now he wants off and they won't let him off.
And now they're keeping him on.
And now they're keeping him on.
Right.
So, there's all this dirty dealing with the ballots. There's all this dirty dealing with, it's just every single step of the way. And I don't think people normally, we would just think back in the day, when I was young and first voting and all of that. My first presidential vote was in 1980. For Ronald Reagan, as a matter of fact, when I was a sophomore at Notre Dame. Actually worked on his campaign at Notre Dame. All of that, you just kind of assumed that you had this big knockdown, drag out beforehand. You tried to win the war of ideas, then you go vote and may the better man win. And I think a lot of people still kind of operate under that. And it's certainly not recently. That's not really how this works, is it? I mean, this has turned into blood sport, open blood, not that it ever wasn't, but it's now open blood sport, from everything from gerrymandering to playing around with the ballots and keeping people off and trying to keep other people on and suing in the courts to get your way, to sort of twist the setup to the election as best you can. And then, of course, there's all the stuff of the voting. We don't have election day anymore. We were talking beforehand saying it's not really, the election day. It's the end. Election day is actually the end of the election that's been going on for 6 or 8 weeks already, depending on where you live. And then, of course, there's everything that goes on in there. That's why you need poll watchers and, people working at the polls. And then people in the room where the votes are being tabulated. This whole thing has been exposed as any link in that chain all of a sudden becomes, critical. And I don't think many people's brains are quite there right yet, but that's where they really need to be, isn't it?
Well, and then don't forget, in some of these states now, it takes like 6 weeks to count the ballots.
Yeah.
We see that in California every time. Now, and the reason they say that it takes so long is that they verify every signature, and it's virtually all mail now. So you've got 10 million votes to count. And because they're verifying every signature, that's why it says it takes sometimes 6 weeks. That's going to matter in the U.S. House majority because there are 4 seats there, and about 6 or 7 are in play in California. But 4 seats that Republicans hold that are really Democratic seats. And can they hold those in a presidential year? But I guarantee you it's going to take about a month to 6 weeks to find out. And those 4 seats, it could determine the House majority. I was doing some calculations on that. House majority could come down to 1 or 2 seats.
Right.
I mean, it's really going to be extremely close. And those 4 seats in California that Republicans sit in that really tend to vote Democrat, there's 3 more like that in New York. Those are going to be major in terms of determining the outcome of the U.S. House. So it's quite a thing. But, when you're going through the types of things we're dealing with now, don't forget, on top of all this, that the Democrats have just summarily removed their nominee after 14 million people voted for him and replaced him with a person who no one voted for. And they're the party of democracy, of open democracy, when all they're doing is they change their nominee without a vote of the people.
Right.
Then they, and don't forget, you mentioned Kennedy, who's been suing to get him off the ballot in certain states, the state Democratic parties.
Yeah.
So,
he's a Democrat. He's probably from is there another, maybe Roosevelt? Is there another name in the last century more associated, family name, more associated with the Democratic Party than the Kennedys? No,
certainly not.
Who would you even put up as a close second? Nobody. And yet here he is. And he wanted to run in the Democratic primaries. And they didn't want him up against Biden on a debate stage. And that was not going to happen.
No.
If it would happen, it would have been the end of Biden right there. Trump never would have gotten to that point, the end of June debate. So, they screwed him over like they screwed over Bernie Sanders in 2016 and sort of again in 2020 as well. Yeah. So, they have, they'll eat their own, destroy their own for the sake of power.
Yeah. And say the Republicans are doing it. Because that's kind of if you look at them, everything they say that the Republicans do is really what they're doing.
Yeah.
And particularly on this democracy.
The idea that every time...
they know they're vulnerable on that, Gary. That's why they're doing it, because they know they're vulnerable on democracy. So we're just going to say that Trump is a dictator. Yeah. And who's been more authoritarian in this country as a president than Joe Biden? With the record number of executive orders.
What are we, 10, 12 days away from the debate? Is that, I think it's the 10th or the 9th or whatever the date is at this point, the 10th. So we're 12 days away from that.
Harris changes it again. Yeah,
that shows them, we should switch sides of the stage you stand on. It's just like nonstop. Yeah. But let's assume they get on the stage and the whole bit and everything. And it happens. And whatever the rules are, there's an audience, there's not, the mics are on, the mics are off. I don't know, your floodlight is on 20%, not 80%, all this crap they keep raising. Skip all that. Here they are, national television audience, probably a gigantic television audience. And I would sort of view that as the opportunity for Trump to do the slam dunk and have this over. Because she doesn't
maybe his only opportunity.
Yeah. So given that set of circumstances, how does Trump suppress his lesser angels and really stick to policy? Because she's going to come. She doesn't have policy. He should. If I were him, I'd walk out on the stage with a MAGA cap and hand it to her and say, "Here, since you're adopting all my policies, welcome to MAGA." That would be a fun little thing. Of course, he'd be accused of being a racist pig and everything else if he did that.
Of course, yeah.
But
he's going to be accused of that anyway.
Yeah, well, that's true. It'd be a great little gimmick. Hand her a MAGA cap. Oh my gosh, that'd be freaking hysterical. Because they'd have to talk about what was the meaning behind it. They denounce it and everything else. But hey, President Trump, if you're listening, let's do that. But
as we've gone over this,
go ahead.
But as we've gone over this litany of positions that she has changed, I just never seen anything like this, that you can change everything you've stood for 20 years as a public official and expect people to buy it. And can they get away with this?
Yeah.
I don't know.
People don't know her. Yeah. And they get the media constantly saying, hey, look at this great plan she's got to, no tax on tips. And yay, let's build the border wall. This is Democratic media, covering for a Democratic liar.
It's really astonishing if they pull this off. I think it'll be the greatest con in history. But, the Biden
COVID.
Changing her position on fracking. Israel, she goes back and forth.
Yeah.
The single payer on healthcare, meaning no private insurance, which is what she advocated for years.
Right.
Defunding the police, which she was for, claiming that if solving increase in crime with expanding police budgets is backward thinking, is what she said. And then the whole border situation that she was appointed the czar, and others basically say, no, she was never appointed the head of the border. Well, of course she was. And it's just astonishing that she can sit there and they can try to change every position she's held from the radical left, which is where she is, and try to make her into some centrist now, and now adopting the Trump policies. I mean, now she's for a border?
She's for a border wall all of a sudden. Are you kidding me? Jim, we got about 30 seconds left. I just want to get your closing thoughts onto the whole topic of the show. If there was, I know there's a million things, but if there was one thing you would say, everybody pay attention to this, because it's got good predictive value, perhaps, what would that be? 30 seconds, go.
I would say forget everything, but just remembering to vote and get your fellow patriots to vote. That is critical. And we need to find every person Trump does that could vote for him and make sure they're on the rolls and get out to vote. That happened in Pennsylvania back in 2016, and that's what confounded the pollsters, the fact that some of these people, particularly in northern Pennsylvania, in the rural areas, coming out of nowhere, who have never voted before, came out to vote for him in 2016. That has to happen again in 2024 if he's going to win in places like that.
Overwhelm and make it too big to rig. That's the point. All right. Jim, thank you very much for your insights.
Just forget everything but vote.
Everything else, go vote. Make sure you vote. Go vote. All righty. As we leave you today, a quick thought. The campaign of joy being run by Harris is really a campaign of zero substance. Trump's followers can tell you a long list of what he will do or always wants to do because he's on the record and he's been the president already and he's done many of those things. Kamala's supporters, not so much. From what she will do, they can't even tell you what she's done. Watch this.
What is Harris's biggest accomplishment to date as vice president?
I don't know. I don't feel comfortable doing this anymore.
She was a very good vice president.
That's an interesting question. Getting to vice president.
I have to do more research on her, honestly. I'm just glad to see a woman of color in charge for once. That's it.
I haven't followed her political career that closely.
That's a good one. I don't know.
Yeah. I don't want to do that.
The lies from her campaign and then propped up by the media are actually a mask from the party that brought you the mask mandates. Remember those? The joy they're all talking about and going on for. This is code language for hate of Donald Trump. And not just him, although he is the target, literally, but also his supporters. But even more, it's hatred for the nation. But even here, that traces back further to the principles the nation was founded on. And those principles are rooted in Catholic proclamation of natural law. They take joy in the campaign, much like Satan takes joy in the destruction of a soul. It's not really joy as we understand it. Satan isn't capable of experiencing joy. He doesn't even get satisfaction from his works, even when his soul is damned because of it. It's just simply his nature to destroy, and he follows his nature. Like every single thing in creation operates according to its nature. It's a law of natural law. Putting the spiritual and theological reality of joy next to the Democrats' operating definition of joy, we see this striking comparison. An evil man or woman will burn their own civilization to the ground so as to become the monarch and rule over the ashes. Each individual, however, must lie. They have to lie to be good to naive people. This is how they have to do it. They got to go to naive people and lie to them and convince them, or at least enough of them, that assisting in the works of destruction is actually a good thing, that good will emerge from it all. Because most good people, people of goodwill, operate from their own worldview, their own self, coming from the good, that they are mostly incapable of understanding that wicked people actually do exist and the things they do are really rooted in evil and wickedness. This naivete among people of goodwill is the upper hand. It's the secret sauce that evil men possess. It allows them a foot in the door, posing as something they're not, a sort of a nose under the tent. And once in, then they can begin their works creating havoc, as we have seen unfold before us. Once we reach this level, the only thing left to do is wake up as many people as be willing to listen, and then fight and hope and pray. We are near the end of one worldview or the other, and the wicked one has a very large head start. God love you. I'm Gary Michael Voris.